Thanks for coming back and welcome new friends to the In-Between. This is the podcast where we share and talk about third culture and cross-cultural experiences.
Today, we are going to talk about culture shock based on our experiences. So relax and grab your drink, get comfortable, and surf the cultural wave with us.
All right, welcome back. Talking about culture shock. I think people know about culture shock as a phrase, but I'm not too sure if people know about culture shock in what it really means behind the words. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure that you and I are both quite familiar with the definition of culture shock and what the feeling is behind this definition. So there's a lot of ways to describe culture shock, but essentially it's the feeling of disorientation.
Right. And so we experienced it and we feel the uncomfortable of culture shock. What is culture shock exactly? What do you think people usually experience culture shock?
Well, it doesn't have to be like a foreign culture. A lot of people think that you experience culture shock when you go to a different country, but that's not really the case. It's true, but it can be an unfamiliar way of life or even different attitudes. For example, if someone were to travel from, let's say, the west coast of the US to the east coast of the United States, right there could be culture shock, right? Or even going from one school to another school could be culture shock. It's just the way that things are done in this new environment could be unfamiliar. You feel maybe uncomfortable, maybe disoriented, and maybe are dealing with some frustrations.
I think it's as long as it's different living lifestyle, different food, ingredients, way of cooking, eating, or even way of speaking. I think that's all considering as culture shock.
For sure. And some people are addicted to that feeling, right? They want to go somewhere where it is unfamiliar and they can experience something brand new.
Yeah, I think some people are actually addicted to it. They just want to jump from places to places and feeling and get to know new people, new culture. I don't know, like those people are actually, I would call it a warrior, to be honest with you.
It's that sense of adventure, right?
It is. I mean, we were moving from places to places, in our childhood, and we experienced a lot, I would say. So what was the most culture shocking experience for you so far?
For me, I would have to put my top two would be the first time I went to Hawaii. Essentially, It was the first time I came back to America as a child who knew what was going on. Because the first time I left America was when I was 3 years old. So I really didn't know what was happening. But after living in Japan for several years and then coming to the US, that was a big time culture shock for me. And I would
Do you have anything like specific that you right now think, that was a big culture shock?
I think going to the school and interacting with the other kids in fourth grade at the time was pretty big. I probably was way shy for my age and for the place I was at, and they probably thought I was weird for the way I behaved.
Really? Well, that's some kind of a negative impact, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that would definitely be a situation where I was disoriented, right? I didn't know how I should behave in this setting because I came to this new place with a new community, new culture, new set of attitudes, and I had no idea what I was doing.
Right. Yeah, that's usually something that people can face when they have culture shock. Yeah, disoriented. That's the most the key thing.
How about you though? Like, can you remember your biggest experience in terms of culture shock?
Well, I have been living in 3 places back then. Taiwan, US, and China a little bit, and each one of them has been at least 2 or more years. But the most memorable culture shock when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, was the school hour. So it's school related, but it's about the school hours. Because in Taiwan, I'm not too sure in Japan though, a high school student goes to school from like 7:30 in the morning till like 5 or 5:30 in the afternoon. Okay. But when I first started my education in the US, the school hours was from 8 o'clock until 2:30 only.
It's way shorter, right?
Way shorter. And so I had no idea how shocked I was when I first experienced it. Because I was like, what? School ended at 2:30 in the afternoon? So I had time I not only had time to hang out with my other friends and teammates back then because I was on a sports team, and I was able to develop some other hobbies, mostly sports. Like not only basketball, but also playing a little bit of volleyball and tennis at the time. So I was really surprised about the hours because it still gave me like quality of education. Yeah, I was just shocked. Like, how do I need to stay in school from 7:30 until 5 p.m. back then in Taiwan, in Asia? I'm not too sure how other countries in Asia, but especially in Taiwan, we students stay in school for such a long time. Yeah.
Right. I'm sure the parents appreciate it, right? Since they don't have to.
I'm sure, yeah, because they don't need to babysit. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
And then a lot of kids, have their, club activities or cram school afterwards.
Yeah, that was the thing. A lot of students stay in school for such a long hour, and then they had to go to cram school after the school. So for example, they got out of the school at 5 o'clock, and then they will have dinner outside, like on street or in the small shop, restaurant, whatsoever, and then they go to cram school from like 5:30 to 6 o'clock all the way until 7 or 8 o'clock, just for one subject, for math or for English, sometimes for Chinese, and for some other stuffs. It's crazy. So they usually get back home like about 9 o'clock. I'm not too sure if it's still happening like right now, at this time. But back then the students won't be home until like 9 o'clock. It's common. It's common.
By the way, your voice sounds a bit different today.
Yeah, actually, since you mentioned that, give you a round of applause for our first sponsor of the show.
Woo!
Today's episode is sponsored by ROG, Republic of Gamers, Taiwan. We are thrilled to receive a gaming microphone from ROG Taiwan, the ROG Carnix, a USB gaming microphone built for creators and gamers who want a studio-level clarity without the studio fuzz. It captures your voice with crisp detail and a warm broadcast feel while keeping background noise from hijacking your message.
ROG Carnix features studio-grade 25mm condenser capsule, which delivers a truly rich and warm vocal tone. 192 kilohertz, 24-bit high sampling rate provides high-resolution, extremely detailed audio, built-in pop filter that cuts down on vocal plosives, high-pass filter to enhance voice quality, and more. For a cross-cultural podcast where tone and nuance carry the meaning, clean audio isn't a luxury, it's a must. If you want your audience and teammates to hear every pulse, laugh, enthusiastic, and honest confession, Carnix makes you sound confident, consistent, and professional every single time.
This year marks ROG's 20th anniversary, such a milestone. Get your ROG product, especially the ROG Carnix, online or at the ASUS and ROG store in your nearest location. ROG, for those who dare.
All right, let's get back to the episode. It's kind of a side story, but I recently read an article where there's cram schools for cram schools. So the cram school gives you so much homework, so you go to another cram school to help you do the homework for the cram school.
That's crazy. Are you serious?
Yeah, in Japan.
In Japan?
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
So
wow.
I'm like, wow. That's dedication.
Then how many cram schools are there for another cram school?
I know, right? How deep does the rabbit hole go?
Yeah, that's crazy. I never heard of that. I'm not even sure if it happens the same in Taiwan though. If it does, then that's too much.
Yeah.
That's too much. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you were looking to this culture shock thing a few years back then. I kind of want to ask you, what are the stages of culture shock? Can you explain to us briefly?
Yeah, of course. But before I get into that, I wanted to actually share an example of what culture shock might look like in kind of a game-based setting.
Okay.
So I came across this article years ago, but essentially I thought it was a really good way to explain what culture shock was. So imagine you're in a classroom with several tables, and at each table there's about about 5 or 6 people, and you're all playing a card game. Now, before you start playing, the teacher puts a sheet of paper on each table, and everyone reads the rules of the card game. And then before you begin, the teacher will take those papers away. And as soon as she says start, you're no longer allowed to communicate or speak to each other. You just silently play the game. So you play for about 5 minutes or so with people at your table. And then after that, the teacher will ask 1 or 2 people to move from their table to another table. And then you begin playing again. But quickly you realize the way that you're playing the game is incorrect. Everyone at the new table that you're sitting at is looking at you strangely. Why are you playing it like that? But they're not telling you. They're just saying, they're putting your hand up, telling you no, essentially. Like, no, you can't do that. And you're so confused because that's the way you've been playing it at the place where you came from. And essentially after a while, after some friction and frustration, you start adapting to the new rules at this new table. And finally, you move again to a different table. And this time you're a little bit more receptive. You understand, okay, there's a good chance that the rules at this third table are going to be different again. And they are, but you're more receptive and you adapt to them quickly. So this was an example of what culture shock might feel like. And again, if you're the one who's not moving and you have new people coming to it, you're expecting them to, acclimate to your culture quickly. But, if it's their first time, it might be a little bit, difficult for them. There would be more friction. It may take longer. So then the people on the receiving end need to learn patience and tolerance. Yeah.
That's a good one. That's good. And sometimes when a newcomer experience culture shock locally, it's unspoken and it's not explainable to what a local culture or a new culture is from both sides.
Exactly. Maybe they can speak the same language or have a common language, but again, explaining some of those nuances takes a long time and isn't as easy as it might seem.
Right. Yeah. So in academic way, are there like a patterns or stages of culture shock to become like a full circle kind of thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a few different ways to look at it, but a lot of people say there's 5 or maybe 7 stages of culture shock, beginning with the honeymoon phase. So that's when you go to a new culture and everything looks wonderful, everything's exciting, fresh, new, because you're dealing with all those like surface level aspects of that culture. If you imagine
everything is neat.
Yeah, exactly. If you imagine like an iceberg, you're only, touching the tip, the food, the fun stuff, so to speak, right? But if you're not a tourist or living in that new environment, right, you're going to start realizing some of those other cultural aspects beneath the surface. And that's when that culture shock, that second phase starts to kind of set in. You begin getting frustrated with, wait, what? Why is this so difficult to do? Or what? That doesn't make any sense. I think a lot of adults coming to Japan for the first time to live might experience a lot of like administrative headaches and these catch-22 situations where it's really difficult to integrate into the society. And that's all part of it. After that, finally, you start to recover. You're getting used to it. And then finally, phase 4 sets in where you adapt to the new culture. And so those are the first 4. And then people might be wondering, the 5th phase could be when you return back home. We call this reverse or re-entry shock, where you go back to your original culture. You've adapted so much to the new culture that now some aspects of your original culture seem unfamiliar. A lot of common issues might be you might go back and tell your family or friends back home about it, but they just can't relate. And you feel frustrated.
That's right.
With that gap right there.
That's right. Yeah. I experienced a lot of a reverse culture shock when I first moved back to Taiwan. Yeah.
How did you get past that? Like, did you just accept that they just couldn't understand where you're coming from and you tried to just reintegrate into your original culture?
To be honest with you, I think the best way to get through reverse culture shock is from food. You get to know people by eating or sharing food with them. And then you can get to talk, your background and their backgrounds from that, And usually, I have a belief that food is based on culture. You can understand food in order to understand a culture behind it. So it's like why people eat sushi in Japan. Why it's part of the culture. You can understand how they preserved the food back then and how they invented sushi, why it has to be uncooked, whatsoever, something like that. And so I think understanding food from a place is the best way to understand the culture, because everybody has to eat. So I get to get through my reverse culture shock from reintroduce the Taiwanese food to myself. So I will go to streets and go to those street vendors, not necessarily have to talk to the owner of the shop, but feeling what they are cooking and what they're offering in the food in order to have the experience and the experience of eating in order to get closer to the local people. So I have more story to tell when I eat those food. When I talk to Taiwanese people, I will be like, oh, have you tried such and such? I've tried it. Like, this is what I think. And I really like one of the shops, who sell this kind of food from certain places. Nowadays, I think Taiwanese people love to share where they eat or what is like good shop of certain food in town. Especially like for example, stinky tofu, like we talked about last time. People have their own favorite stinky tofu vendor in town. And sometimes they even compare from north to south of the country. And so it is really easier to talk about it when you have a conversation with people about food. Yeah. Then you go from there in order to understand someone.
I mean, as we did talk about food in a previous episode, food and drink are such an integral part of a country's culture. It is. It's so deep rooted.
It is. And we're going to talk about drinks later on in the future episodes for sure. Not only the drink is, not only the soft drinks, but also the alcohols too. But we'll see how it goes. Yeah. So back then in childhood, did you know anything about culture shock though?
I don't think it was until maybe like my teenage years where I learned about it. I actually gave a talk during high school, so that was my first encounter with it.
Okay. But after you learn it, what did you realize? Were you like just open your mind like, oh, so there was culture shock. That's what it is, like that.
I think it was like a light bulb going off in the head, right? You suddenly realize, oh, all this frustration or difficulty I faced is normal. It's part of it.
Right.
And there are others like me who go through the same thing. And we're actually part of a group called TCKs.
Right.
So essentially, at that point, you're okay with it, and it all makes sense at that point. You come to terms with the struggles that you went through because there's a course or a path you need to take, and there is light at the end of the tunnel.
I definitely agree with you on that one. For me, back then, I did not know about anything about culture shock. Not at all. I never heard of it until I went to UA. First did not pay attention about the term, and then start to sink in slowly and realize, oh, my past experience of culture shock doesn't matter where I live, by comparing the lifestyle and habits of living in Hawaii and Taiwan. But after I learned it, it's sort of easier for me to face culture shock again.
I agree with you there.
Like you said, finally get to see where the other side, the lights on the other side tunnel. It's more of like, okay, I realize right now I'm facing culture shock, and this is where I am right now, and I might face the next or the end of the stage at some point, and that gives me like a preparation of what I'm going to react when I face something in culture shock. Yeah, that's way better than just figuring it out myself. Before I learn it, I'll be like, okay, why I have to face this, why I have to face that, and why people react in this way, and what I'm gonna do when I face the same thing or bump into the same experience in the future. I was a little bit in the confusion before I learned it, or before I actually get to know any of those. So it definitely helps me to prepare myself for that. Yeah.
I think a good metaphor is like a child being afraid of what's inside their closet, right? But if you know what's inside of there, then half the fear is gone. So for any like young people who are looking to maybe travel abroad or do a study abroad program, the best advice probably we can give them is to try to do some research of the local culture before you go. If it's a school or the environment, learn as much as you can beforehand. If possible, even talk to some people there before you go. And that way you know what is waiting for you. And when you finally meet those monsters, putting that in quotes, you can face them head on and know how to deal with them.
Definitely. Yeah, back then we did not have a really resourceful stuffs online. And right now people can use internet all the time to talk to see what's on the other other side of the tunnel. Yeah, it's definitely helpful. That's a great suggestion, man. That's a really great suggestion. I wish I had it back then.
Same here.
Seriously.
Instead of just going in blindly, not even
I
aware
know.
of the concept of culture shock.
I mean, regardless of the age, you moved to Japan when you were 3, and then I moved to the States when I was 15. Regardless the age, as long as there is someone or something to help a person to move from A to B, that's all good. Like you said, if you know what's in the closet, then half the fear is already gone. That actually reduce the intensity of knowing what's on the other side.
For sure.
Yeah.
And kind of on that topic, in your opinion, do you feel that culture shock will change or affect the person psychologically?
Yeah, definitely. I would say this 100%. For me, it's kind of an exciting experience. Like you said, it's the honeymoon stage for culture shock at the beginning because everything is pretty new. And when I first learned it, I'm the type of person who can actually adopt a new environment when I was a kid. I'm sure a lot of people are able to do the same. And then when I started to get used to the new culture, or sort of internalize it more naturally instead of it assisting my original living style, I'm pretty much just going with the flow when it comes to adopting things. So I think it changed me psychologically is that there is something that I don't know, although I'm exciting to give it a try, but I'm still facing the challenge in trying to internalize it to become a new me. That's actually affecting who I am and what I am psychologically. Yeah.
I feel like for those who do go through culture shock, there's a couple different paths they can take, right? There are those who come out of the culture feeling very grateful for the experience, and there are others that come out of it, feeling negative, not liking the experience. Some of the, I guess, feelings that someone could go through, if it's a negative experience, definitely frustration, perhaps isolation, and maybe even wanting distance from that culture and those people, right? Whereas if it is a positive experience, you come out feeling more flexible, tolerant towards that and new cultures. This is more of a neutral stance, but feeling resilient.
Yeah. And I think psychologically, culture shock is giving me an opportunity to know different culture and its people. It's not necessarily for comparison, both places, but to understand which angle and which perspective that people are from. I would say there's more of the positive impact of a culture shock, I guess. But on the other hand, that also gives me an opportunity to allow other people to learn my thoughts and my perspectives. I think that has to go both ways. Yeah. I think like I mentioned in a couple episodes before, especially for reverse culture shock, the person that is experiencing a reverse culture shock is not only that the person is relearning his home culture, but also for his or her old friends to learn what's a new person that he or she has become.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, that goes both way. Yeah.
There's a question I wanted to ask you. How long do you think it takes to, experience this whole cycle of, culture shock, recovery, and adaptation?
That really depends on how long you stay in the new culture and also how long you stay in the home culture, though.
Sure.
So, like, for example, I stayed in my home culture for 15 years before I moved, and then I stayed in the new culture for another 10 years.
Sure.
And now I'm back in the home culture for another 10 years. So my cycle is 3 decades. That's not necessarily has to be the example, a fixed example, or like a textbook example for that. I mean, it really depends on how much you're involved in the culture or the society that you are currently living. Somebody can stay in a foreign country for 10 years, but he or she never experienced the local culture. That can be possible.
Could be. I always was of the opinion that it took about 3 years to finally get through the cycle and to adapt to it.
You mean for a new culture, or
for
the
new
home
culture?
For the relearn of the home culture too.
To a new culture, right? If you leave your home culture and go to a new place and try to make a life there for a while, it would take roughly 3 years to kind of achieve adaptation, maybe longer. And it also depends how deeply you try to integrate into it. If you stay within your own bubble of people from your home country and don't try to venture culture into the society, or maybe even start dating someone from that culture or be part of some communities, then it likely would take longer because you never got to experience those first frustrations.
Yeah. But 3 years, I think it's a fair amount. I think it's a fair length of time to get used to it. I think it should be good. Yeah.
And again, committing to live somewhere foreign for 3 years is not an easy thing to do, right?
Not at all.
Right?
Yeah.
That's quite a disruptive part of your life.
Right.
To take that time away from your family and friends back home and to try something. I think a lot of military families, especially from the U.S., they do this just because it is required of them.
Right.
I have some good friends who travel quite frequently at a 3-year interval to go to different places. And right when they're about adjusted to the new culture, it's time to leave and go to somewhere new.
I know, that's the thing. That's actually the thing that's hard for people to adjust it. And that sometimes even develop another way of personality, saying that, I'm not gonna get to know a lot of the people in depth because I know I have to move again. That's actually not, I wouldn't say it's a good thing. And I totally understand where's that coming from. But just that, I think there's a better way to handle this kind of situation. Not necessarily that you're moving out, soon in the future, so you don't get yourself into the society to get to know people.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, imagine a high school student who goes to a new school, but let's say that person knows they'll only be there for 1 year. So does that mean they won't try to make new friends because they know they'll be leaving soon? Is that the right attitude to have? Or should they try their best to make the best of that time while they're there?
Right. To be honest, we're not judging, but we're just saying that in order to have a better life or a better attitude towards to this kind of a challenge, we're suggesting people to do in such way. If you have a different opinion, that's fine, but please share with us if that's what's the best for you, and let us know, and we can talk about it. In your opinion, do you think that the culture shock changed you psychologically?
Yes, for me personally, I'm sure it has. I feel more than anything, I've become a little bit more resilient, perhaps a little bit distant, and trying to integrate into new communities. I know myself, and I know that I want to integrate into new communities, but subconsciously, I distance myself just out of habit.
Because your childhood experience?
Just because I'm so used to the idea of moving, changing schools. I think growing up between kindergarten and university, I've went to somewhere between 10 to 15 different schools. So I was very used to switching environments, losing friends, making new friends, and going through that cycle so many times that I feel like after all these years, I've been primed to be a little bit more distant in terms of jumping into a new community too quickly.
Okay, yeah.
But I want to.
Yeah, that's the thing, because you have to push yourself to do.
Exactly. That's the point right there. You have to push yourself to get out there and, as you said, hit those street vendors and taste different foods so you can share it. You need to push yourself to get out there and to try to be part of different communities until you find a new area that that feels like home.
Right. Yeah. You are sort of like creating your new home just for yourself.
Yep.
Just for yourself. Yeah. So that's a good point, man. That's a good point. Yeah.
So I think especially you and I, since we're the older side of being a TCK, or maybe in the middle ages of it, that you start to get set in your ways as you get older. When you combine that with entering a new cultural environment, it's even more difficult to kind of get out there and find a new home, a new sense of belonging with that community. So you have to push yourself even harder. And that's the challenge.
I actually have I'm also wondering one thing, because me and you, we're like, our parents are like one nationality. Both our parents are American and both my parents are Taiwanese. I wonder what it's like for a mixed person to experience a culture shock. That would be interesting. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe we can talk about it. Maybe we can have a guest speaker talking about it in the future. But for the audience, if you guys are a mixed person, so for example, your parents are not from the same countries, I kind of want to know how you guys are experiencing culture shock. because you are already in two different culture base and experiencing a third culture if that ever happened.
Yeah.
So
very fascinating, right?
I know. Yeah. Let us know. Leave your comments. Share your story with us. Yeah. So last but not least, do you think culture shock still exists with the technology that we have right now? Because technology already shortened our distance and get to know different cultures with a tab of with a screen. Do you think it ever exists?
Of course. I do definitely agree that technology has shortened the distance for many people. They can call home, text with their parents and family back home, and share their new experiences as they go so that they feel like they have someone to share it with. And when they go back home to their original country, those people who are important to them have a kind of an idea already of what their friend has gone through.
Right.
And the other side of the coin is that technology has evolved how culture shock might look like. And the example I wanted to share here is something like Twitch or a YouTube subscription, some kind of online community. Right?
Yeah.
Twitch, it's a streaming platform where people can either like talk or play games or do their hobbies and share them. What it does is build a sense of community so people can come watch them, chat, and interact with other people. And essentially that channel starts creating a community. Mm-hmm. And if you are going there for the first time, it may feel unfamiliar. There could be a lot of inside jokes that the people there are talking about, and you don't understand any of that, and that can be frustrating and maybe even turn you away. But if you keep at it and keep interacting with them and pushing yourself, eventually you probably will start feeling like you belong to that community and you don't want to keep coming back.
Right.
So technology has kind of created these web spaces online where you can start to even have a sense of belonging.
Yeah, it's actually making culture shock into a different level, more of a virtual level, I would say.
Yes, virtual.
Yeah, but we will encourage people to give it a try. Select your Twitch channel or Twitch stream room wisely, but I think it's a good way to experience harmless culture shock, I would say.
Right, you can always walk away, right?
You can always walk away. It's unlike that the traditional culture shock, you had to be in that place. And then, whether you would decide to leave in a short period of time or not, right. It's way different. You could just one click away to get away from that stream whatsoever.
Going back to traditional culture shock, technology definitely helps to close a distance. These days we have translation apps, we have AI at our fingertips. So if we don't understand a culture nuance or need help explaining it, we can ask that and learn about that nuance or information more quickly than trying to, ask others around us about it. So I feel like at least knowing isn't as hard as it used to be.
Right. Yeah. You don't need to be explore the local culture by yourself when you are there. You can actually get to know some of the local stuffs before you go. Yeah. That's what the technology is helping. Yeah. All right. So that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoying it. Thanks for listening to this episode, and we will see you next time.
Shoots.